Have you ever walked past a stranger and felt a pull, a silent request for help that the rest of the world ignores? For 24-year-old Irina Evans, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, drenched in unforgiving New York rain. It was a choice that took less than 3 minutes, a decision to abandon her post-risk-her job and guide a frail, forgotten old man through a storm of yellow cabs and angry horns. She thought it was just a simple act of kindness, a fleeting moment of humanity in a city that often forgets. She had no idea she wasn't just helping him cross a street. She was stepping into the crosshairs of a grieving billionaire's legacy, a venomous family feud, and a life-altering test of her own character. What happened next wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war. The rain over Manhattan didn't just fall. It assaulted. It was a cold, driving torrent in mid-October that turned the city streets into a slick, chaotic ballet of screeching tires and blossoming umbrellas. Inside the Morning Glory diner, the air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee, sizzling bacon and damp wool. For Irina Evans, it was the smell of survival. She moved between the cracked vinyl booths with a practiced, weary grace, her worn-out sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. Her apron stained with a faint map of yesterday's ketchup, and today's gravy felt like a second skin. 24 years old, and her world had shrunk to the dimensions of this diner, a cramped walk-up apartment in Queens, and the towering stack of medical bills on her kitchen table. Her dream was a ghost that haunted her. In her small apartment, canvases leaned against the walls, their vibrant, unfinished faces a testament to a passion she barely had the energy to nurture. She was an artist, or she had been. Now she was a waitress, serving lukewarm soup to tourists, and crusty regulars, each clink of a quarter in her tip jar, a tiny hollow victory against the mountain of debt her mother's illness had created. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, watched her from his perch by the cash register. "Evans, table 4 is looking antsy," he'd bark, not looking up from his newspaper. "Time is money, and you're costing me both." It was during the chaotic lunch rush, with rain lashing against the diner's large picture window, that she saw him. He was standing on the opposite corner of Lexington Avenue, a relic from another time. His tweed coat was soaked through, clinging to a frame so thin it seemed a strong gust of wind could shatter him. His white hair was plastered to his scalp, and he held a trembling hand over his eyes, squinting into the roaring river of traffic, as if it were an indecipherable, terrifying text. Cars honked a symphony of urban impatience. Pedestrians' heads, bowed under their umbrellas, shoved past him without a second glance. He was invisible, a ghost already. He took one hesitant step off the curb, and a taxi, swerving to avoid a pothole, sent a tidal wave of grimy street water crashing over his worn leather shoes. The old man flinched back, looking utterly defeated, lost, and achingly alone. Something inside Irina snapped. It wasn't logic. It was a raw, undeniable impulse. She saw her own grandfather in his fearful eyes, her own mother in his frail vulnerability. "Manny, cover me," she muttered to the busboy already untying her apron. "Irina Henderson will have your head." Manny hissed, his eyes wide. "Let him," she said, her gaze fixed on the man across the street. She threw the apron on the counter and pushed through the diner's heavy glass door, the bell announcing her defiance. The cold rain was a shock, instantly soaking her thin blouse and hair. The noise of the city amplified a physical force that pushed against her. She ignored it, her focus narrowing to the old man. Weaving through the throng of people huddled under the diner's awning, she stepped onto the street. "Hey, watch it, lady," a cyclist yelled as he swerved around her. She reached the curb and waited for a gap in the traffic. "Sir!" She called out, her voice nearly swallowed by the roar. He didn't seem to hear her. He was staring at a specific spot in front of the diner, his expression one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He took another shaky step into the street, directly into the path of an oncoming delivery truck. Irina's heart seized. Without thinking, she darted forward, grabbing his thin arm. "Sir, wait!" He startled, his pale blue eyes, finally focusing on her. They were clouded with a confusion so deep it felt like a form of pain. I have to get across," he mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. "She's waiting." "The light's not with you. Here, take my arm," Irina said, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll go together." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face, his expression softening with a flicker of trust. He was surprisingly light, his bones feeling as delicate as a bird's. She linked her arm firmly through his, anchoring him to her. "What's your name?" she asked, shouting over a passing ambulance siren. "Anthony," he whispered. "Just Anthony." When the walk sign finally blinked its white permission, they stepped into the crosswalk. It was a battle. The wind tried to tear them apart, and the traffic, eager to reclaim the intersection, crept menacingly close. Anthony stumbled, his knees buckling slightly. Irina tightened her grip, putting her own body between him and the impatient cars. She could feel his faint trembling, the tremor of age, of fear, of something more, a deep, resonant grief. "Almost there, Anthony," she encouraged, her own heart pounding. Just a few more feet. They finally reached the safety of the opposite curb. He leaned heavily against her, breathing in shallow gasps. She guided him under the small awning of a closed bookstore. "Thank you," he said, his voice clearer now. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the intelligence that lay behind the fog of his sorrow. "Thank you, my dear. You were very brave." "Anyone would have done it," she said, brushing her wet hair from her face. A wry, sad smile touched his lips. "You and I both know that isn't true." He fumbled inside his soaked coat. "Let me give you something for your trouble." "No, please," Irina said immediately, holding up a hand. "It's fine. I'm just glad you're safe. Do you have somewhere to be? Someone I can call for you?" He looked past her back towards the Morning Glory diner, his eyes distant again. "No. No one to call anymore. I was just remembering." He patted her arm gently. "You have a kind heart. Don't let the world take that from you." Before she could press him further, a sleek black car, a Lincoln Town car of impossible shine and stillness, pulled up silently to the curb beside them. The back door opened, and a man in a sharp suit and an earpiece stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. "Mr. Pendleton," the man said, his voice calm and professional, betraying no surprise. "We were worried. Please get out of the rain." Anthony Mr. Pendleton gave Irina one last look, a complex expression of gratitude and deep-seated sadness. He nodded to her a small, formal gesture of farewell, and allowed the driver to guide him into the car's plush interior. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud, and the car melted back into the flow of traffic, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Irina stood there, drenched and shivering, staring at the empty space where the car had been. Pendleton. The name tickled at her memory, but she couldn't place it. Shaking her head, she turned and ran back across the street, the bell of the diner door now sounding like a guillotine. Mr. Henderson was waiting for her. His arms crossed his face, a thundercloud. "You have a death wish, Evans," he snarled. "Or are you just trying to get fired? Leaving your station during the lunch rush for what some bum—" "He was in trouble," Irina said, her teeth chattering. "This is a business, not a charity." Henderson snapped, throwing a towel at her. "Dry yourself off and get back to work. And I'm docking your pay for the 15 minutes you were out there playing hero. Don't ever pull a stunt like that again." Irina bit her tongue, tasting the metallic tang of frustration. She nodded meekly and retreated to the kitchen. As she dried her hair under the ineffective hand dryer, she couldn't shake the image of the old man's eyes. The profound sadness in them felt more chilling than the October rain. She had a feeling her day was far from over. She just had no idea how right she was. The week that followed was a blur of monotony. The encounter with Anthony Pendleton faded into the background, a strange waterlogged memory in a life filled with more immediate concerns. The bill for her mother's latest round of physical therapy arrived its bold red past due stamp, a fresh source of anxiety. At an art gallery, she'd submitted slides to send a form rejection letter, thin and impersonal. Mr. Henderson seemed to have taken her act of defiance as a personal insult, hovering over her, criticizing every move she made. "Evans, you used 3 napkins to wipe down table 7. Are we made of trees?" "Evans, that smile looks forced. Are you trying to scare the customers away?" Irina retreated further into herself. Her conversations with her mother, Sarah, were strained. She'd try to sound cheerful, talking about funny customers or the weather, carefully omitting the part about her dwindling bank account and her boss's tyranny. Her mother, a sharp woman, even through the fog of pain from her rheumatoid arthritis, could always tell. "You're working too hard, sweetie," Sarah would say, her voice crackling over the phone. "You need to paint. It's who you are." "I will, Mum." "Soon." Irina would lie looking at the dust gathering on her easel. It was a Thursday, 2 weeks after the incident in the rain when he first appeared. He was different from the usual diner clientele. He wore a simple but impeccably tailored grey suit, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he carried a worn leather briefcase. He sat alone in a booth at the back, ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, and opened a newspaper. Irina didn't think much of it at first, but he came back the next day. And the day after that. He always sat in the same booth, always ordered the same thing, and always asked for her section specifically. He was polite, quiet, and an impeccable tipper, always leaving a crisp $20 bill regardless of the small size of his check. What was unsettling was his gaze. He never stared, never made her uncomfortable in a predatory way. But whenever she walked past, she could feel his eyes on her. It was a calm, analytical observation, like a bird watcher studying a rare specimen. He seemed to be taking in every detail, how she patiently explained the menu to a confused tourist, how she slipped Manny the busboy an extra bread roll when Henderson wasn't looking, how she sighed with exhaustion when she thought no one could see. Manny noticed it too. "That guy in the back, you think he's a food critic?" he whispered to her from the coffee machine. "I doubt it," Irina replied, glancing over her shoulder. The man who she'd mentally nicknamed Mr. Grey was meticulously folding his newspaper. Critics don't usually come back 3 days in a row and order the same pie. Maybe he's a detective, Manny offered, his imagination running wild. Maybe you witnessed a crime and don't know it. Irina just rolled her eyes, but a sliver of unease had taken root. The man's presence was a quiet disruption to her predictable world. On the 5th day, Mr. Henderson decided to intervene. He swaggered over to the man's booth, his usual false bonhomie plastered on his face. "Everything to your satisfaction, sir." The man looked up from his paper, his expression unreadable. "Quite. The coffee is serviceable, and the waitress is exceptionally efficient and courteous." Henderson puffed out his chest. "That's my Irina. I train them well." The man's gaze flickered to Irina, who was clearing a nearby table, and a barely perceptible smile touched his lips. It was a smile that suggested he knew Henderson had nothing to do with her qualities. "Indeed," he said, before returning to his paper, a clear dismissal. The encounter left Irina feeling even more exposed. The man wasn't just observing the diner, he was observing her. The paranoia began to creep in. Was he from a collections agency, an investigator for her mother's insurance company? The $20 tips felt less like generosity and more like a calculated investment, but in what she couldn't fathom. The breaking point came the following Monday. Irina was having a particularly brutal day. She had been up half the night on the phone with the hospital's billing department, arguing over a charge that had been submitted twice. She'd spilled a tray of drinks, earning a loud public reprimand from Henderson, and her tips were abysmal. She felt fragile on the verge of tears. As she refilled Mr. Gray's coffee cup, her hand trembled slightly, and a small amount sloshed onto the saucer. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she stammered, grabbing a napkin. "It's of no consequence, Miss Evans," he said, calmly. Irina froze. Her name tag was small, just Irina, in simple block letters. She had never worn one with her last name. How do you know my last name?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man carefully folded his newspaper and placed it on the table. He looked directly at her, his grey eyes clear and serious. "My name is Marcus Davies. I am a legal associate for the Pendleton Group." The name hit her like a physical blow. Pendleton, the old man in the rain. Anthony. I don't understand," she said, her mind racing. Was she in trouble? Did Anthony get sick? Did she do something wrong? "Mr. Anthony Pendleton sent me." Davies continued, his voice low and even. "He has expressed a great deal of interest in your well-being since the day you assisted him. My purpose here for the past week has been to form an impression, to confirm his initial judgment of your character." Irina felt a dizzying mix of indignation and confusion. "You've been spying on me to judge my character." "An observation, Ms. Evans, not an espionage mission," he corrected gently. "Mr. Pendleton is a man who trusts his instincts, but he is also a man who built an empire on due diligence. My observations have confirmed his instincts entirely." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with a simple, elegant P. He slid it across the table. "Mr. Pendleton would like to meet with you. He has requested your presence at his residence tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. This envelope contains the address and instructions. A car will be sent to your apartment to pick you up. Please consider it." Irina stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her life was about bills and burnt coffee. It was not about embossed envelopes and private cars and men named Pendleton. "What does he want?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. "He wants to thank you," Davies said, standing up and placing another $20 bill on the table, along with a crisp $100 bill. "This is for your time this past week. The rest he wishes to discuss with you himself." He gave her a slight, formal nod. "Tomorrow at 3, Ms. Evans. I do hope you'll be there." With that, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Irina standing beside the booth, her world tilting on its axis. She looked at the $100 bill, a sum that would take her 2 full days to earn, and then at the impossibly elegant envelope. Whatever was happening, it was far beyond a simple thank you for helping a man cross the street. A cold knot of fear and exhilarating curiosity tightened in her stomach. She was about to step into a world she couldn't possibly imagine. The next 24 hours were a waking dream. Irina went through the motions of her shift, her mind a whirlwind of speculation. Who was Anthony Pendleton? The name, once she Googled it on the ancient computer in the diner's back office, exploded across the screen. Anthony Pendleton wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan of industry. Pendleton Group was a global conglomerate with interests in finance, real estate, and technology. He was a legend, a self-made billionaire from a bygone era, known for his ruthless business acumen, and in more recent years, his reclusive nature, especially after the death of his wife, Eleanor, 2 years prior. The articles were accompanied by photos of a sharp, powerful man with piercing blue eyes, the same eyes she'd seen clouded with confusion, but unmistakably his. The frail old man she had rescued from the rain was one of the most powerful men in the country. The knowledge terrified her as much as it intrigued her. Why would a man like that need to be observed? What kind of thank you required a private car and a personal invitation to his home? She called her mom that night, debating whether to tell her. "Something's on your mind, Irina. I can hear it in your voice," Sarah said. "Irina Cave." She recounted the entire story, from the rainy Tuesday to Mr. Davies and the mysterious envelope. Her mother was silent for a long moment. "Irina," she said finally, her voice cautious. "Be careful. Men with that kind of money. Their world has different rules. Don't let them take advantage of your good heart." "I won't, Mum. I'm just curious and scared." "Just be yourself, honey. That's always been more than enough." The next day, Irina called in sick to the diner, enduring a tirade from Mr. Henderson that she barely registered. She spent the morning agonizing over what to wear. Her wardrobe consisted of jeans, t-shirts, and her waitress uniform. She finally settled on a simple black dress she'd bought for an art show 2 years ago, the nicest thing she owned. It felt woefully inadequate. At precisely 2:30 p.m., the same black Lincoln Town car that had whisked Anthony away appeared at the end of her street. The driver, the same suited man from that day, got out and stood by the door, his presence so out of place in her working-class neighborhood that curtains twitched in the windows of the surrounding buildings. The ride was silent and surreal. They left the familiar grit of Queens and crossed into the opulent heart of Manhattan, pulling up before a limestone monolith on Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park. A doorman in a crisp uniform rushed to open her door, addressing her as Ms. Evans. The lobby was a cavern of marble and gold, hushed and intimidating. She was led to a private elevator, which opened directly into the penthouse. The apartment, if such a word could describe the sprawling space, was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic God's-eye view of the city. The furniture was elegant and understated. The art on the walls was not a collection of prints, but museum-quality originals, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. It was a place of quiet, immense power. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Anthony Pendleton. He was no longer the frail, disoriented man from the street. He wore a perfectly tailored cashmere sweater and slacks. His white hair was neatly combed, and he stood with an air of quiet authority. He looked every bit the billionaire titan she had read about. He turned as she entered, and his face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Miss Evans, Irina, thank you for coming." "Mr. Pendleton," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It's an honor. Please call me Anthony. I believe we've dispensed with the formalities, haven't we?" He gestured to a pair of plush armchairs near the window. "Please sit." She sat on the edge of the cushion, feeling like an imposter. Mr. Davies entered the room, silently placed a tray with tea and biscuits on the table between them, and retreated, closing the doors behind him. Anthony poured the tea, his hands steady and precise. "I imagine you have a great many questions." "A few," Irina admitted. "First and most importantly, I want to offer you my sincerest apology." He began, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "For my state when we met, and for the rather unorthodox methods of Mr. Davies. You see, Irina, in my position, genuine kindness is a commodity rarer than any masterpiece on these walls. It's often feigned a prelude to a request." I had to be certain. Certain of what? That your heart was as pure as it seemed in that moment. He said simply, "And it is. Mr. Davies reported that you treat everyone with the same quiet dignity, from the rudest customer to the busboy you share your lunch with. You are an authentically good person, Irina Evans, and that is a very rare thing." Irina felt a blush creep up her neck. "I just try to be decent." "And that is everything," he said, a shadow of sadness passing over his features. He looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the park below. "I owe you an explanation for that day. I wasn't simply lost. I was on a pilgrimage of sorts." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The Morning Glory Diner. It wasn't always called that. 50 years ago, it was a little place called the Bluebird Cafe. It was where I took my wife Eleanor on our first date. We were nobodies back then. I was a struggling analyst with one good suit, and she was a secretary who thought my ambition was charmingly naive." He smiled at the memory. "We sat in a booth by the window, and it started to rain just like it did the other week. When we left, we stood on that very corner where you found me. I was terrified, but I finally worked up the courage to take her hand. Right there in the middle of a New York downpour." His voice grew thick with emotion. "She passed away 2 years ago. That day, it was the anniversary of that first date. I told my staff I wanted to be alone. I took a cab and just walked. I wanted to see it again, to feel it again, to feel her again. But the city has changed so much. The noise, the speed. I became overwhelmed. All the memories came flooding back, and for a moment I wasn't a billionaire in his penthouse. I was just a lost old man desperately missing his wife." Tears welled in Irina's eyes. The story was so profoundly sad, so deeply human. It recontextualized everything. His vulnerability, his whispered words. "She's waiting." "When you took my arm," Anthony continued, his voice soft, "you didn't just help a stranger. You showed a kindness that Eleanor herself would have shown. In that moment on that corner, so sacred to my memory, you honored her. You cannot possibly understand what that meant to me." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "I find myself in a position to do more than just say thank you. I've learned about you, Irina. I know about your artistic talent, your struggles, your mother's illness. A life of quiet decency should not be a life of constant hardship." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "I want to change your life, Irina. I have the means, and you have given me the reason. The question is how." Irina sat in stunned silence, the delicate porcelain teacup feeling heavy and foreign in her hands. The raw, emotional confession from Anthony had stripped away the intimidating aura of the billionaire, revealing the grieving husband beneath. But his final words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. "I want to change your life." I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't owe me anything, Anthony." "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But I feel a profound need to. Call it an old man's whim, if you like. But I believe that an act of genuine goodness should be met with an act of genuine gratitude. I see in you a spark the same creative fire Eleanor had. She was a painter, you know, a brilliant one. But she set it aside to support my dreams to raise our family. It was her one regret." He looked at the Rothko on the wall. "She always said that art wasn't a luxury, but a necessity, a way of making sense of the chaos. To see your talent being smothered by the necessity of slinging hash in a diner, it feels like a cosmic injustice I am uniquely positioned to correct. Irina's mind reeled. This was the moment every struggling artist dreams of a patron, a savior descending from on high. But it felt wrong, unearned. "I can't just take your money," she said, the words coming out stronger than she expected. "My mother raised me to work for what I have." Anthony's smile was understanding. "I admire that, which is why this is not charity. It is an investment in talent. I have 2 proposals for you. You may choose one or neither. The decision is entirely yours." He leaned back, his fingers steepling. "Proposal 1 is simple. I will establish a grant in your name. It will be enough to cover all of your mother's medical expenses, pay off your debts, and provide you with a generous living stipend for the next 5 years. Your only obligation would be to create, to paint. No deadlines, no commissions unless you seek them. Just the freedom to find your voice as an artist without the crushing weight of survival." Irina's breath hitched. It was an impossible dream laid out on a silver platter. No more Henderson. No more worrying about prescription costs. Just her and her canvases. The temptation was so overwhelming it made her dizzy. "And the second proposal?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The second," Anthony said, his eyes gleaming with a different kind of energy, "is more ambitious. The Pendleton Foundation has a philanthropic arm that supports many causes, including the arts. It is largely a check-writing organization, steered by board members who understand balance sheets better than they understand brush strokes. It lacks a soul. It lacks Eleanor's soul." He gestured around the magnificent room. "I want to create a new initiative within the foundation. The Eleanor Pendleton Grant for Emerging Artists. It would seek out people exactly like you, artists with immense talent but limited means. It would provide them with studio space materials, mentorship, and financial support. And I want you to help me run it." Irina stared at him, dumbfounded. "Run it me, I'm a waitress. I have no experience in whatever that is. Philanthropy, administration. You have the most important experience of all," Anthony countered. "You know what it's like to be on the other side. You understand the struggle. You have the eye of an artist and the heart of a compassionate human being. I can hire administrators and accountants. I cannot hire your perspective. You would be the director of artist outreach. You would find the talent. You would be their champion. You would, of course, be compensated with a salary that would solve all your current financial problems, and you would be given your own studio space and dedicated time to pursue your own work." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the city below. One offer was freedom. The other was purpose. One was a solitary gift. The other was a chance to pay her good fortune forward to countless others. But a cold tendril of doubt snaked its way into her heart. It was too much, too fast. Life wasn't like this. There were always strings attached, always a catch. People from her world didn't get plucked from obscurity and handed a kingdom. "Why me?" she asked the question, filled with a lifetime of quiet insecurity. You could have your pick of thousands of art curators, museum directors, people with Ivy League degrees and years of experience, because none of them stood on a rainy corner and offered their arm to a lonely old man. Anthony said, his voice soft but resolute. "They have resumes. You have character. Eleanor always believed that who you are is more important than what you have accomplished. I am choosing to honor my wife's wisdom." He could see the war playing out on her face, the hope, the fear, the deep-seated disbelief. "You don't have to decide now," he said kindly. "Take a few days. Think it over. Talk to your mother. Mr. Davies will give you his card. You can call him with any questions. But Irina. He added his gaze, holding hers. Please know that this offer is sincere. There are no hidden clauses. There is no catch. There is only my gratitude. As the private car whisked her back to the gritty reality of Queens, Irina felt more lost than ever. The black dress felt like a costume she had to remove. The penthouse felt like a dream she was waking from. In her hands, she clutched Marcus Davies's heavy cardstock business card. One path offered her personal salvation. The other offered a chance to build something to create a legacy. But as she walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment, the doubt returned a bitter taste in her mouth. What if her mother was right? What if the rules of this new world were different? And she was just a naive pawn in a game she didn't understand. The sheer scale of Anthony Pendleton's generosity felt less like a gift and more like a weight, one she wasn't sure she was strong enough to bear. And she had a gnawing feeling that someone somewhere in his gilded world would not be happy about the waitress who had suddenly captured the billionaire's attention. Irina chose the second proposal. After 2 sleepless nights, she realized that simply taking the money and retreating to a studio felt selfish. The idea of creating a program that could help dozens of other struggling artists, people who were just like her, ignited a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. It was a way to honor not just Anthony's generosity, but the spirit of Eleanor herself. Her first 2 weeks were a whirlwind. She was given a temporary office at the Pendleton Group's gleaming skyscraper, a glass-walled space that overlooked the Statue of Liberty. The salary that appeared in her bank account was so large, she thought it was a clerical error. Mr. Davies became her guide, patiently explaining the labyrinthine structure of the foundation, introducing her to accountants and setting up meetings. Anthony was a benevolent, if distant, mentor. He checked in with her daily, his calls filled with encouragement. He delighted in her fresh perspective, her talk of finding raw talent in community art centers and online forums instead of just the established art schools. For the first time, Irina felt her opinion mattered. She was no longer just a pair of hands carrying plates. She was a mind, a voice. She moved her mother into a better apartment in a building with an elevator and hired a top-rated specialist to oversee her care. A fragile blossom of hope began to bloom in her chest. But every Eden has its serpent. His name was Joel Pendleton. He was Anthony's nephew, the son of his younger, long-deceased brother. In his late 30s, Joel was handsome in a severe predatory way, with slicked-back hair and eyes that held a perpetual dismissive smirk. He was a senior vice president in the company's acquisitions department and saw himself as the rightful heir to the Pendleton empire. He learned of Irina's existence not from Anthony, but from whispers among the executive assistants. The Waitress project, they called it. His initial reaction was amused disbelief, which quickly curdled into suspicion and then cold fury. He saw Irina not as a person, but as a threat, a gold-digging interloper who had somehow sunk her claws into his aging sentimental uncle. He orchestrated their first meeting to his advantage. He accidentally ran into her in the executive lounge, a place of hushed tones and expensive coffee she still felt too intimidated to use. "You must be Irina Evans," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but laced with condescension. He didn't offer to shake her hand. "I've heard so much about you. It's quite the Cinderella story." "Mr. Pendleton," Irina said, forcing a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Joel, please," he insisted, though the invitation felt like a command. "I have to say I'm fascinated. My uncle has always been a shrewd judge of character, but this is a new level of philanthropy. Tell me, what was your secret?" A particularly charming smile, a well-practiced damsel in distress routine. The insult was so blatant it stole her breath. Your uncle was in distress. I helped him. Of course you did, Joel said with a humorless chuckle. And now you have an office with a view and a direct line to the man who signs all the checks. A remarkable return on investment for 3 minutes of your time. You should be in finance. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Let me give you a piece of friendly advice. My uncle is a grieving man. He's sentimental. He's not as sharp as he used to be. People can take advantage of that. But his sentimentality will fade. And when it does, the people who exploited it will find themselves on the outside looking in. The fall from a tower like this is a long one. He straightened his tie, gave her a dismissive once-over, and walked away, leaving her standing there, heart pounding, feeling the familiar chill of being powerless. Joel's campaign against her was insidious and subtle at first. He started rumors. He'd mention in board meetings with feigned concern that the new Eleanor Grant was being spearheaded by someone with no background, no vetting, and a very personal connection to the chairman. He instructed his assistant to dig into Irina's past, looking for any dirt he could find, old boyfriends, financial troubles, anything. He began to challenge her directly. He would show up unannounced at her meetings with the foundation's financial team, questioning her proposed budgets with surgical precision. A stipend of this size for unproven artists, Ms. Evans, he'd ask a skeptical eyebrow raised. It seems rather excessive. One might think you're simply trying to recreate your own recent good fortune for your friends. Irina, though intimidated, found a surprising well of strength. She defended her proposals with passion and logic, drawing on her own experiences. Artists can't create if they're worried about rent, Mr. Pendleton, she'd reply, her voice steady. This isn't a handout. It's an elimination of the distractions that kill creativity. Her competence only enraged Joel further. He saw his uncle's growing admiration for her as a direct threat to his own influence. He needed to destroy her credibility completely. His attack escalated. He arranged a meeting with Anthony, bringing a thin file with him. "Uncle Anthony," he began, his voice oozing with false concern. "We need to talk about Irina Evans." "A wonderful topic," Anthony said, smiling from behind his desk. "She's a breath of fresh air, isn't she?" "She's a liability," Joel countered, placing the file on the desk. "I've done some digging. For your protection. She comes from nothing. Her family has a mountain of debt. She was on the verge of bankruptcy before she found you." "I'm aware of her circumstances, Joel. That's the entire point." "Is it?" Joel pressed his voice, hardening. "Or is it a perfect motive? Look at this." He opened the file. "These are phone records. She called her mother a few hours after your initial meeting. A long call, no doubt strategizing. And look here, her bank records. The first thing she did with the salary was pay off a host of past due notices. She's not a visionary, uncle. She's a desperate woman who hit the jackpot." Anthony's smile faded. "What are you suggesting, Joel?" "I'm suggesting she's a con artist. A very good one, I'll grant you. She saw a vulnerable old man, played on his grief for Aunt Eleanor, and is now systematically draining the Foundation's resources. You need to cut her loose before she does any real damage to your legacy and to our family's name." The accusation hung in the air, venomous and ugly. Anthony looked from his nephew's smug, triumphant face to the file and then to the window, his expression unreadable. For the first time, a seed of doubt planted by the person he should have been able to trust the most began to take root in the old billionaire's mind. The summons came via a sterile email from Anthony's executive assistant. Mr. Pendleton requests your presence for a meeting in the main boardroom tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss the future of the Eleanor Pendleton grant. Mr. Joel Pendleton will also be in attendance." Irina's blood ran cold. The wording was ominous formal. The inclusion of Joel's name felt like a declaration of war. For the past week, Anthony had been distant. Their daily calls had become brief, his tone strained. She knew Joel had been in his ear dripping poison. Now it seemed the poison had worked. She spent the night in a state of quiet panic, staring at her canvases. This was it. The fairy tale was over. Joel's words echoed in her head. The fall from a tower like this is a long one. She thought about her mother, now comfortable and receiving the best care. She thought about the hope she'd felt, the purpose. It was all about to be snatched away. She almost decided not to go, to just pack her things and disappear back into the anonymity of the city. But then a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She hadn't done anything wrong. She would not let a bully like Joel slander her without a fight. The next morning she walked into the main boardroom, a vast, intimidating chamber, dominated by a mahogany table that felt a mile long. Joel was already there, leaning back in his chair, a smug look on his face. He nodded at her, a gesture of a victor acknowledging the vanquished. Anthony sat at the head of the table, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. Mr. Davies stood discreetly against the wall, his face a neutral mask. "Irina, thank you for coming," Anthony said, his voice flat. "Joel has raised some serious concerns about your role in the foundation." "I'm sure he has," Irina said, meeting Joel's gaze with a level stare. Joel opened a file in front of him, the same one he had shown Anthony. "The facts are indisputable," he began, his voice ringing with corporate authority. "Ms. Evans has no credentials. Her financial history is one of desperation. She has systematically directed foundation resources towards a project with no oversight, one that happens to benefit her personally. The entire premise of her hiring is based on an uncorroborated story of her helping you on a day you yourself admit you were disoriented." He let the word hang in the air, an insinuation of senility. He turned a page. "Furthermore, I've had a private investigator look into her. It turns out the Morning Glory diner is on the route to several high-end pawn shops. How do we know this wasn't a setup, that she didn't target you? It's a classic con uncle. Find a wealthy mark, feign kindness, and reap the rewards." Irina felt the blood drain from her face. The accusations were so twisted, so vile, they were almost absurd. But in the cold, sterile light of the boardroom, they sounded plausible. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "None of that is true." "Then explain it," Joel challenged. "Explain how a broke waitress suddenly becomes the director of a multi-million-dollar art fund. It defies logic." All eyes turned to Irina. This was her moment. She could break down or she could fight back. She thought of her mother's words, "Just be yourself, honey. That's always been more than enough." She stood up, her hands gripping the back of her chair. She looked not at Joel, but directly at Anthony. "I can't explain it in a way that will satisfy him," she said, her voice gaining strength, "because he sees the world through a lens of transactions and angles. He can't comprehend a simple act of kindness because he's probably never performed one." Joel scoffed, but Anthony held up a hand to silence him. "You're right," Irina continued, her eyes locked on Anthony's. "I was desperate. I was broke. My mother was sick. And every single day was a struggle. But that doesn't make me a criminal. It makes me exactly the kind of person Eleanor Grant is supposed to help. The day I met you, I wasn't looking for a mark. I was on my way back to a job I hated, run by a man who was about to fire me, because I took 3 minutes to help a man who looked like he was about to get hit by a truck. There was no strategy. There was no angle. There was just a person who needed help. Tears started to well in her eyes, but she willed them back. Maybe you've made a mistake. Maybe I'm not qualified for this job. And if you want me to leave, I will. I'll go back to the diner, and I will figure out how to care for my mother on my own, just like I was doing before. I survived before I met you, and I will survive after. She took a deep breath. But I will not stand here and let him twist the one decent thing I did into something ugly and transactional. That moment was real. Your grief was real, and my help was real. And I am sorry, truly sorry that your own family can't see that. She turned to leave her dignity, her only remaining possession. Stop. The word was quiet, but it carried the immense weight of command. It came from Anthony. He had pushed his chair back and risen to his feet. He looked at Joel, and for the first time, Irina saw not a sentimental old man, but the ruthless titan who had built an empire. His blue eyes were chips of ice. You have always misunderstood me, Joel. Anthony said, his voice low and dangerous. You see my wealth. You see my company. You see a legacy of assets and stock prices. You never saw the foundation of it all. You never saw Eleanor. He walked slowly from the head of the table until he was standing beside Irina. He looked at his nephew. You talk about that street corner as a liability, a place of disorientation. Let me tell you about that corner. That corner is more important to me than this entire building. On that corner in 1968, I held the hand of the woman who would give me everything that truly matters in my life. On that corner, 50 years later, as a heartbroken old man, I was shown a moment of grace by a stranger who had no idea who I was and had nothing to gain. He pointed a trembling but firm finger at Joel. You bring me files and investigators. She brought me humanity. You see my grief as a weakness to be managed. She saw it as a pain to be eased. You want to protect my legacy. My legacy is not this company, you fool. My legacy is the love Eleanor gave me, and Eleanor Grant is not a side project. It is the single most important thing I will do with the time I have left. It is the continuation of her soul. He turned to Irina, his eyes softening. And this young woman is not a liability. She is its heart. She is the only person in this entire company who truly understands what we are trying to do. He looked back at Joel, his voice dropping to a final chilling verdict. Your investigation is over. Your involvement in the foundation is terminated. And if you ever speak to Ms. Evans with anything less than the utmost respect again, you will find your position in this company is no longer tenable. Am I understood? Joel stared, his face pale, his smug confidence shattered. He had overplayed his hand and lost spectacularly. He simply nodded, unable to speak. Anthony then turned to Irina, his expression one of profound apology. Irina, I am so sorry. I let his venom cloud my judgment. I should never have doubted you. It's okay, she whispered, overwhelmed. No, he said firmly. It's not. But I intend to spend the rest of my time making it up to you. Now let's get to work. We have artists to find. 1 year later, the Eleanor Pendleton Grant for Emerging Artists held its first ever public showcase. The event wasn't in a stuffy, intimidating gallery in Chelsea, but in a converted warehouse space in Brooklyn, vibrant and humming with energy. The walls were covered with a riot of color and form, bold abstract paintings, haunting photographic portraits, and intricate sculptures that seemed to defy gravity. Irina moved through the crowd not as an observer, but as the creator. She had shed the last remnants of her waitress hesitancy and now wore a quiet, confident authority. She greeted the artists, a young sculptor from the Bronx, a single mother from Queens who painted in her kitchen after her kids were asleep, a former accountant who had quit his job to follow his passion, by name, discussing their work with an expert's eye and a friend's warmth. She had found her calling. It wasn't just in creating her own art, though she was doing that too. Her own large canvas, a stunning, emotional piece inspired by the chaos and color of the city, hung in a place of honor. Her true calling was in nurturing the creativity of others, in being the champion she had never had. Her mother Sarah was there walking without a cane, her health vastly improved, thanks to the consistent top-tier medical care. She beamed with a pride that was almost incandescent, holding Irina's hand. Eleanor would have loved this, a familiar voice said. Irina turned to see Anthony Pendleton, looking 10 years younger than the day she'd met him. He was leaning on a simple cane, now more for style than necessity, his eyes sparkling with life. The fog of grief had lifted, replaced by a radiant sense of purpose. She would have been right in the middle of it all, Irina agreed, smiling. Probably arguing with that young man over there about his use of impasto. Anthony chuckled. Without a doubt, you've done more than I ever could have imagined, Irina. You didn't just create a program, you've created a community, a family. Joel was gone. After the boardroom confrontation, he had been transferred to the company's Singapore office, a lateral promotion that was in reality a gilded exile. The foundation under Irina's guidance and Anthony's unwavering support was thriving. Later that evening, as the event was winding down, Irina stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The city skyline glittered across the river. It was the same city, the same unforgiving, chaotic metropolis. But she saw it differently now. It was no longer a mountain of obstacles, but a canvas of possibilities. Her life had been irrevocably changed by a simple choice on a rainy day. But looking back, she realized the money, the job, the status, those weren't the real gifts. The real gift was the discovery of her own strength, the strength to be kind in a cruel world, the strength to defend her integrity, and the strength to build something meaningful. A young woman, one of the artists from the show, came out and stood beside her. Irina, she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you. A year ago, I was about to sell my camera to pay my rent. You didn't just give me a grant, you gave me my life back. Irina smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. She put an arm around the young artist's shoulder. You're welcome, she said, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan. Now let's go show them what you can do with it. The story of Irina and Anthony reminds us that the biggest changes in our lives often hinge on the smallest choices. It wasn't a winning lottery ticket or a lucky break that transformed her world. It was a 3-minute decision to see another human being struggle and act with compassion, expecting nothing in return. It's a powerful testament to the idea that character is our true currency. In a world that often rewards selfishness and cynicism, we must remember the profound rippling impact of a single selfless act. How many Anthonys do we walk past every day? What opportunities to change a life, or to have our own life changed, do we miss when we look away? If this story touched your heart, please help it reach others by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who believes in the power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more real-life stories that inspire and remind us of the incredible good we are all capable of. What did you think of Irina's choice? Let us know in the comments below.